I'm Brian Belfour. I'm founder and CEO of Reforge. Today, we are talking about the next great distribution shift and what to do about it and how to navigate it. This is something that has been bouncing around in my head for months. And it was something I just felt like I needed to get out there in the world because it's just such an important topic. We're going to go through a couple things today. One is that I'm just going to kind of give an overview of what I mean by this AI distribution shift and sort of the cycle and things that tend to repeat. But then there's, of course, the most important question, the second question, which is, all right, well, now you know about it. How do you actually navigate it? What do you actually do about it? So I'm going to go through those two things, and then we're going to answer some questions at the end. Once again, to ask a question, please use the Q&A panel. Also go in there and just upvote other people's questions so I know what you all want to talk about and what's most important. Hopefully we'll get to most of the questions, but if we don't, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to answer kind of questions there as well. We will be sending out the recording of this. So don't worry about that. We'll send the recording of this out afterwards. But also, if you want more details on this topic, this is something I'm actively writing about, like super in depth. You can go to my Substack. You can either just go to brianbelfour.com or blog.brianbelfour.com. That'll take you to my Substack, where I've been publishing about this topic. And we'll continue to publish about it as we kind of see new things develop in the ecosystem. All right, let's dive in. So the first thing I want to talk about is that there's this great quote from Andreessen Horowitz's partner, who says, the battle between every startup and incumbent comes down to whether the startup gets distribution before the incumbent gets innovation. And this is an incredibly important quote and topic, because this is the challenge that we are all in, whether we are a startup or we're launching a new product or kind of competing against any of the incumbents. And, you know, right now we're actually living in this environment, or we're in this part of the cycle where I think this is getting way harder, this escape velocity that he is talking about. And it's getting harder for a few reasons, right? One is that AI has enabled incumbents to copy faster, which kind of shrinks the window available to get that escape velocity on distribution for new products. Also, if you're like me, you're probably feeling the pain of like organic channels are on the decline, right? There's something every single day about the declining number of clicks from Google due to AI overviews and those things. LinkedIn recently changed their algorithm and massively suppressed organic distribution. The switch from Twitter to X kind of suppressed outbound traffic, all these things. So this distribution is becoming harder to come by, at least organically. And then finally, right, like software is just easier to write with AI. And so there just feels like an infinite amount of competition of like new startups and new products at the startup level. And so this is just this, once again, this escape velocity is becoming really, really important. So the main thing that we need to think about is, okay, well, how do we get distribution, that escape velocity? That's one of our core things that we need to be thinking about. And there's multiple ways that this happens, but if you look at history, one of the main ways that this happens, especially for new products and startups, is when new distribution channels and new distribution platforms emerge. And Casey Winters had this excellent blog post almost 2 years ago now at this point, where he talked about the technology shift around AI. And his main point of the blog post was that there are technology shifts that come with distribution shifts as well, and some that don't. And the really impactful ones are the ones that are both a technology shift and it enables a new distribution platform and new distribution channel. And we hadn't seen that yet in AI. Like we hadn't seen that, 18 months ago or 2 years ago. And so, because when these new distribution platforms emerge, they create all sorts of new opportunities to jump on. And you kind of see this, all sorts of things start to happen. And so the question for the last couple of years has really been, it's been obvious that AI has been a technology shift, but the question is like, where's the distribution shift? Where is that going to come from? Will it come with the technology shift? And I think we are at the moment in time where we're about to see this really play out in a very, very big way. And that's typical too. Distribution shifts tend to lag the technology shift, right? The technology shift happens. It takes time for the ecosystem to deploy the new technology, new things, new products to emerge, new behaviors to emerge. And so, if we look at history, we're kind of right about on time for this. We're kind of a couple years into this AI shift, and I think we're right at that inflection point. And I'll talk specifically later about what my prediction is of who the new distribution platform will be and why. Um, but the most important thing to understand about these distribution shifts, whether we look back at things like social and social networks, or the move to the cloud and SaaS, or mobile, or all of these other kind of historical distribution shifts, is that they essentially follow the same pattern over and over and over again. And you need to understand what this pattern is and what the cycle is in order to figure out like how to navigate it. How do you take advantage of it? How do you kind of gain from it? All of those types of pieces. And so it essentially follows the same three-step pattern. However, I'll add like a step zero in here first. And what that pattern is in step zero, essentially you have a new category emerge, and consensus forms around the fact that this category is going to be huge. And as a result, you have typically 5 or 6 major players really competing it out. So in social, everybody now thinks like obviously Facebook dominates, right? But when social was just emerging, actually, Facebook was not the dominant player. MySpace, Friendster, Orkut, there was a bunch of others that actually had a lot more. But there was consensus that, hey, social's really important. It's really going to be very huge. 5 or 6 people really competing it out, right? And it kind of creates this sort of competitive environment for this to emerge. The second step, or the first step here, is then, okay, one of these players ends up identifying what is the moat, what is the thing that is going to separate me from the rest in order to hit that escape velocity and really dominate this new category, because these new categories tend to be either monopolies or duopolies. And then once they identify the moat, they tend to realize, hey, I can't I can't gather all of that moat just operating myself. I need the help of others. And so that's where they tend to open some type of third party platform to get developers or creators to contribute to their product, to solve all the possible user use cases, to accrue more of that moat, to really hit that escape velocity. And then eventually, at some point, they start to close that platform down, and in order to monetize, once they have already achieved escape velocity. So it's better to go through the cycle in a bunch of examples, which kind of makes it obviously clear, but it's the same exact cycle every single time. So let's go through some samples, and then I'll return to this about what my critical warnings are for this version of the cycle with AI. So let's start with social, with Facebook. This was one that I lived viscerally, painfully. My first company was in that. It went through the full cycle of seeing explosive growth by building off of the Facebook platform, and then unbelievable decline as they closed it down. So this is the one that I painfully understand the most. But as social emerged, you had Facebook, MySpace, Orkut, all of these different platforms emerging. Facebook was not the biggest one at the time, but they were first to identify the moat. They realized, hey, the social graph is the thing that forms the network effect here. It's the thing that is feeding engagement. It's going to feed growth. So what did they do? In 2007, they opened up the Facebook platform. There was this value exchange with third-party developers. They said, hey, we're going to give you this canvas space. You can develop whatever you want in it, a game, an application, whatever. You can monetize it within this canvas space however you want. You keep 100% of the revenue. We're going to give you access to organic channels to distribute this application, right? All we want is the real estate on the side of the website to put ads and monetize that way. That's how it started. And so developers all rushed in, creators all rushed in. There was this huge explosion of social games, social apps, like all this type of stuff. Those games helped Facebook accrue more new users, more user engagement, more connections on the social graph. And then all of a sudden, what ends up happening is that Facebook starts peeling back all of those things that they gave developers. They start clamping down on their organic viral channels. They start taking a tax on the revenue that apps were generating within that canvas space. They started developing first-party applications of the most popular third-party applications, and eventually they essentially shut the entire platform down. So I went through this full cycle in like a 4 or 5 year time frame. And yes, there were some very small examples of folks like Zynga that actually survived the end of this cycle, but there was actually hundreds of others, well-funded companies that were generating millions of dollars in revenue that completely disappeared overnight. All right, so that was Facebook. But let's think about like Apple and iOS. Same thing, right? They launch the iPhone. There were a ton of phones, tons of smartphone players like at the time, right? They were certainly not the biggest one. They identified the moat that this was going to be all about third-party applications. They developed the App Store, the organic distribution, access to user data, all of these things to help people build businesses in new in new applications. And of course, over the years, what we've seen is they've gained dominance. They basically have started to become more and more restrictive over time, peel some of those things back in order to push application developers and other things to their ad platform, all of these things to help them monetize now that they have clear escape velocity and dominance in the market. Now, one piece of pushback I usually get on this is that, oh, Android actually owns 70% of the market. And that's actually incorrect. Yes, they own 70% of the devices, but only 30% of the actual revenue of mobile. Apple owns the opposite. They have 30% of the devices out there, own 70% of the revenue. Guess what's more important? The dollars, right? On that stuff. And so it went through the same cycle. A couple more quick ones. LinkedIn has gone through the exact same thing. They realized they needed to become more than a profile destination. They needed people engaged in different ways so that they could accrue more professional data to sell it to recruiters and salespeople and folks. They opened the gates on organic content creation, first from companies and then from individuals. They were pumping that organic creation to get people a lot of views and distribution. Then they started to create ways to monetize that through thought leader ads and other things. And then now they've started to clamp down on all of that organic distribution to push people towards ads and sponsored content in order to monetize it. So everything goes through the same cycle over and over and over again, right? And so there's a couple questions on this, like what platform's going to be next? How do you navigate? And then how do you navigate this if we expect it to go through the exact same cycle for AI? Now, this is my personal prediction, but I want to be super, super clear. This is a prediction at this point, right? There are multiple reasons why I could be wrong about this prediction. The specific prediction matters way less than understanding in what the potential cycle might be as we go through it. And in your position, understanding like what's your product, what's your audience, all of those types of things so that you know how to play the game. My personal prediction out of all of the new AI players, whether you think about OpenAI with ChatGPT, Google with Gemini, Meta with their products, Anthropic with Claude, all of those things, right? It's pretty clear AI is going to be a dominant category. These chat experiences are going to be hugely important across a number of users. There's consensus around that. You've got 5 or 6 players massively battling it out. Now, what's the next part? Identifying the moat. Well, it's starting to be pretty clear that a huge part of the moat is going to be memory and context, that actually these models by themselves, there's not a ton of differentiation. And where the real differentiation on what creates quality output and that user value is how much context and memory that the model has in order to personalize and generate a good outcome. OpenAI is the farthest along on that front right now, which is part of my prediction. So the next phase, well, what might happen? Well, I think a couple things might happen. There are going to be ways that they will probably open the gates, and this probably happens in 2 different ways. One is that it's already happening on whatever is replacing the search experience, that generative engine optimization. And you can already see the whole ecosystem starting to rush towards optimizing and creating content in order to appear in these generative responses. But the other way that I think this is going to play out is that there's some clear indicators that they are going to launch some form of third-party platform, probably a third-party agent platform. They've been actively soliciting integrations publicly. They've had a ton of job posts around PMs and engineering positions around an agent platform. There's a bunch of signals around this. And so if this happens, what is going to eventually happen? They will eventually close all whatever that value exchange is to come develop on their platform in order to monetize in some way, shape, or form. Now, this could come in a number of different ways. It could come in the form of a platform fee, ads for preferred placement in these results, potentially a platform tax taking a percentage of revenue, or stuff that we've already seen, which is they will adopt and integrate and build the most popular use cases as first party applications in order to monetize. So my personal prediction is that the next platform is going to be OpenAI and ChatGPT. But once again, it's more important to understand the cycle. Now, why do I think OpenAI and ChatGPT is the platform? There's a few pieces on this besides a couple of things, but the most important thing is this graph. And I'm sure if any of you have been part of Reforge, you've seen this graph before. It's retention curves. And we always say like retention is the most important thing. It is the engine to growth. And a common mistake I've seen in historical cycles, and I've even made myself, is that by choosing a platform, people are paying attention to who has the most scale, like the most monthly active users. But if you look back at historical shifts, the eventual winner is almost never the one at this part in the cycle is the one with the most amount of users. It's typically the one with the most amount of retention and engagement. That tends to be the best predictor of long-term success. So when Facebook entered the ecosystem and launched their third-party platform, they only had about 20 million monthly active users. MySpace and others had closer to 100 million. So they were literally 5x behind. Similar with Apple and iOS, they certainly didn't have the most distribution, but they had the most engagement in the devices that they ended up on selling, and so on and so forth. And so this was data pulled by Didi Dasa. He's at Menlo Ventures. And you can see these retention curves. Number one, they're flattening out. Two, they're smiling, meaning that they're increasing over time, which is super rare. And then three, they're shifting up with more and more recent cohorts, meaning that they're retaining people even better and better. The newer users coming onto the platform. The only other times I've seen the combination of all three of these things are in cases like Facebook, like Slack, like these huge outlier products that ended up owning their category. You can also see that they have the highest retention compared to all of the other players in the space right now as well by a pretty decent, significant margin. The only one that's kind of close is Claude at the moment. And my guess is that specifically because Claude has really focused in on professionals, more specific kind of developer types of use cases. They have a much smaller overall audience than ChatGPT, but the ones that they do focus on, they're doing a pretty good job of retaining it, like a ChatGPT. So, you see all of these, like kind of signals playing out. So once again, which platform is next is less important than understanding like how to navigate the cycle. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you navigate the cycle? If you're in your position, how do you take advantage of this cycle? Well, the first thing to know is that if we look at all of these distribution platform shifts over time, there is a general trend that the cycle from open to close is getting shorter and shorter. And the reason is that these platforms learn from history. They are becoming more and more efficient at essentially identifying that moat, opening to get that escape velocity, and then monetizing it over time. And so we have less time essentially to play and anticipate this game as we go through this shift. And the other part of this is that the common response to this, the gut response to this is like, well, if they're going to close this down eventually, I'm not even going to play this game. Like that's the common response. But we all have to understand that we are in a prisoner's dilemma, right? Which is that if you don't want to play the game, that's fine because your competitors are going to. And as your competitors play the game, they are going to change the expectations of your target market. Users will get used to it. They are going to want to see your data, your experience, whatever it is, integrated into one of these platforms. And so it essentially forces you to play the game, even though you know how it ends, right? And so rather than kind of focusing on this, it's actually more important to say, okay, well, I know how this game ends. So how am I going to enter this game? And then how am I going to form an exit strategy over time, knowing how this all ends as well? It's actually better to be early to this cycle than to be a naysayer and then basically be forced into the game later into the game, because a lot of the opportunity is essentially arbitraged away at this point. So, you know, one of the key things at this part of the cycle is that like we're going to have to choose the platforms as the platforms emerge and options become available, right? In the early social game days or the early mobile days, right, there were multiple options that I could choose from in order on like what platform to develop. And the two most common responses is like, I'm going to be early but diversify across platforms, right? That tends to be the wrong choice, except for very late stage players that have tons of resources that can properly diversify, wait for somebody to emerge, and then throw their muscle behind it. But for startups, right, where we have limited resources or earlier stage companies, like all those things, we tend to need to take a really focused bet and really kind of go all in with all of our chips in order to get that outsized return. We don't have the opportunity or the advantage of being able to diversify and then muscle in at a later date. The other common reaction is I'm going to wait and just dedicate any resources until it's a clear winner is. But once a clear winner is established, most of that opportunity tends to be arbitraged away, right? And so you basically have to be early if you want to take advantage of this. Fareed Masavat, who I do a fun podcast with called Unsolicited Feedback, we kind of talked about this, and he had a really, really good quote and example, a couple of quotes and examples on this. He said, in the mobile shift, if you just bet on Apple, you could be a winner. Like Instagram, if you bet on just Android, you almost no winners emerge from that. If you were somehow capable of doing both, you would grow faster, it turned out. But building for both took a lot of resources and time. And if you happen to be one of the few players that built on Windows Phone at the time, well, that was just a huge waste of time. And what this highlights basically is that if you diversification is not the clear winning strategy here. It's like if you bet on the person that ends up being the winner, that or the dominant platform, that's what creates the actual winners. And if you get that bet wrong, right, that's really troublesome. And that's why the first choice is monitoring these platforms and figuring out, okay, taking a bet on who do I think is going to be the winning platform, and then deciding on how you're going to invest in that over time. He gave another example, which I thought was good, which was the same was true on the Facebook platform. Some people did okay on MySpace if they chose that, but eventually all the developers shifted to Facebook. And there were a million other networks at the time that I even built on, a bunch of international players that had their own platforms, all those types of things. But it turned out in the end, the winning move was just that if you just built on the Facebook platform, those were the people that gained the most, because all the other folks ended up disappearing over time. And so when I think about platforms, there's literally four criteria that I think about. The first one, scale, as I mentioned, is probably the least important of them all. But you do have to understand like what are the potential size of their user bases, right? Because you want to be choosing a platform ideally that you think is either currently or going to grow into having an audience many, many, many times larger than yours, right? And that's kind of like what provides the tailwind. However, scale is necessary, but it's not sufficient. What you really need is that retention and engagement, because that is what's really going to both be the biggest predictor of the platform over time, but it also just represents the most important criteria, because the more retained and engaged their users are, the more engagement they're going to provide into your product, whatever you develop into the platform as well. And that ends up like having an interesting compounding effect. The third thing to evaluate is user quality, right? Different platforms have different monetization potential. In the mobile era, it was Apple had multiple times more monetization potential, even though it might have had less users than Android. It was similar with Facebook. Facebook users monetized way better than MySpace or Orkut or all those other early social networks. And then the last thing that you need to evaluate is what is the value exchange between the platform and its developers, right? So, what are they giving you, or what are they making accessible to you in exchange for developing to their platform, right? And my guess is in the AI era, it's going to be some combination of organic distribution. That's probably the most important piece. And then probably access to some of the stored context and memory that people are, are adding to these platforms like ChatGPT and Gemini, because that value exchange is like, well, you should develop to me because I already have the user context and the user memory. And so if you integrate to me, you're going to be able to generate a much better experience for your end users by using some of that memory and context, right? Like that's my guess on what the value exchange is going to end up looking like. But within there, there's going to be a bunch of rules defined, right? And understanding the rules to a super detailed level is actually where you find the opportunities and the arbitrage. In the Facebook era, the ones who understood the Facebook APIs, both the ones that were publicly public and played around, a lot of people found like shadow APIs to the platform that they weren't publicly publishing, and they were like taking advantage of really understanding what you were able to do inside the platform and getting creative on those experiences. And so those are the four criteria you have to evaluate when choosing a platform: scale, retention, engagement, user quality, and whatever the value exchange is of the platform. And so then the second question is, okay, that's my entry strategy, choosing the platform, right? But once you choose a platform and you really start focusing, then you immediately have to start shifting to, okay, I know how this cycle ends. What am I doing to prepare for my exit strategy? Once we get into the close part of the cycle. And there's kind of a few things that you could potentially do here to build that defensibility over time. One is, this first layer, right? You controlling a core part of the user workflow and experience for whatever product you have. So if the only way that your user interacts is just through the chat experience through of one of these platforms, and they never have to pop out for something deeper and more meaningful, that's probably a problem. You're probably going to get disintermediated pretty quickly. The second is kind of embedding into that workflow. Sorry, I got these two kind of a little bit confused. And so user experience and workflow kind of go hand in hand. Certain use cases need a specialized user experience to kind of complete the job. And then there's kind of workflow, things that you might be able to do in these platforms, kick off in these platforms, but things that you're going to want to pop out into experience to go even deeper. The third is specialized context accumulation, these data moats. And so, of course, these platforms are going to be accruing context and memory through their integrations and other things. But for every specific use case, whether it's a professional use case like in accounting or finance or legal, or a consumer use case like travel, the more specialized data, context and memory that you can accrue, the better the output and experience you will be able to generate for your customers. And so like the test here is like, all right, well, what is the relative delta between the user output and experience if they just had the context and memory provided by ChatGPT or something, versus what is the output if we combine that context and memory with the specialized context, memory, and data we have? There should be a very clear difference between those two types of outputs. And the last piece is like micro data network effects. And so I imagine like new forms of defensibility, new forms of like network effects will start to take shape in these like agentic type of experiences that we're going to end up plugging into these platforms over time as well. But specialized user experiences, workflow integration, specialized data and context, and building like additional network effects on top of the platform itself. These are the things that you have to start thinking about in order to exit at the time. So once again, kind of to sum this all up on like, what do you do about this? If you're a startup, you gotta take a bet on a platform as it emerges and commits. Half measures lead to irrelevance. You gotta enter with an exit strategy, right? Build that independent defensibility even before it's clear that they're closing down the platform, and just move fast, right? The cycle is going to move super fast. So you got to be very brutal. If you're an incumbent, and have a lot of access to resources and other things, then you can diversify your bet, but Just don't underestimate how fast something can get distribution when they take a focused bet. And once winner becomes clear, like you got to be ready to shift your strategy on a dime, go all in, use whatever distribution muscle, whatever asset muscles you have, to really make sure that you have a really strong presence on that winning platform and figuring out your exit strategy yourself. All right, so that's all. That's kind of like all the content I have. Once again, like there's no escaping this game. There's no escaping this cycle. The cycle is, I'm very confident, will emerge again and is about to play out. And the worst thing you can do is just sit on the sidelines. The best thing you can do is be early, but don't be naive. Understand how this all ends, and play the game because it is a game at the end. This is competition. This is like building companies, and so they're playing the game, so you got to play them back, right? That's how this all works. All right, I'm gonna take questions once again. Please use the Q&A panel on this and upvote the questions that you think that are most important, and I will focus my time on there. I might call in a couple people too, just live, just to so that we can break up my voice. But let's start with Pedro's question. Do you think we'll be able to advertise on ChatGPT answers like we do on Google searches? My guess is yes. I think we've already seen early signals of this, certainly. And so, and the reason I think it's going to happen is because if we think back to, okay, what is it going to take for one of these platforms to hit escape velocity? It's not just about the total number of users I have, but also that memory and context that they're collecting. And that memory and context that they're collecting comes from usage. And so it's actually, you know, the the more they're able to grow their free user base and accumulate more of that data, that context and personalization, the faster they're going to hit that escape velocity. Now, the problem is with AI, with free users, as I think we all know by now, is that it actually costs real money. Like our usage, our queries cost real money, right? Much more than, a free user on the social network or even like a free user on search. And so they are going to need to find ways to cover those costs, to move more functionality to the free user base, to attract more free users and more usage. And this is likely going to come in the form of ads. Obviously, some of it's being covered by subscriptions and all that type of stuff. But I think we know over history too is that the like all subscription models typically only like can monetize a certain percentage of the user base, and ads will kind of take shape. And I think the ads are going to be more valuable in this use case because the answers of the experiences aren't sending nearly as much traffic as like a typical search experience. And so if that's where all the users are interacting and we want traffic from those places, we're likely going to all have to bid for that space. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to come and come relatively soon as well. Last note on this is I just want to be clear once again in my prediction. When I talk about the next distribution channel, I don't just mean whatever the replacement is to search. I think that's going to be one thing, but I'm pretty sure on the other piece is that there's going to be some part of like some third-party developer ecosystem equivalent to the iOS App Store and apps, right? As most likely going to come in some form of agent platform to begin with. And so that I think is kind of a separate thing that also these two things probably go through their own independent cycles on this front. Okay, let me see what other questions we have here. Nalim asked, can you walk through how AI will affect all jobs in the near future? Hope you can cover this question on another session. Oh boy. Yeah, this is like, I think it's a question that's on all our minds. It's on my mind every single day for sure. Both as like a founder and employer, but even like my own relative value and like what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Where I get to in every single one of these conversations, which I probably have on a weekly basis, is the same exact answer. And the answer has two parts. One is that it's impossible to predict the future around all of our jobs, right? It AI is moving so fast. It's such a transformative thing that you have a very low probability of predicting the future correctly. It's like a very low chance. And so if that's a very, very high stakes game to be playing is to try to like predict something and make some big career changes based on that. So instead, the second part of the answer is actually the best thing that we can all be doing if we're thinking about this question is actually to just try to be power users of all of these tools and all of this technology. Because as long as you're doing that and you are one of those power users, you are going to know, you're going to naturally navigate the waters as they shift. You will be in demand for roles and opportunities and from companies who want to act in a more AI native way. Our titles might change, right? I don't know. Like, we're going to still have product manager titles. I don't know. Are we going to sell product? I don't really know. But I don't think it really matters in the end because you can't predict the future very accurately. And so any energy kind of really spent on that is energy. I think that's wasted on things that you could be focused on like using the technology and as power user kind of forward of the way. And that is the best way to navigate the waters. So I know I didn't answer I'm not putting a prediction out there on jobs, but I'm more answering, I think, the best way for us to all essentially respond to all of the change as quickly as possible as well. Neelam, it looks like you have a follow-up question. Let me see if I can unmute you here in a second. All right. Yeah, go ahead. I think you got to unmute first.
Unmute. Okay, got it. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can.
Hi, Brian. Great session. Loved it so much. Um, I do agree with you, like being tool agnostic. Sorry, using the tools often is the way to move forward. I think even in was it the HubSpot founder, Dharmesh said the same thing. But
Oh, yeah.
how do you position yourself to be like, oh, I'm a power user. I know XYZ in this because I see that nowadays a lot of the AI roles expect you to use AI or generative AI with your
Mhm.
day-to-day work at work and having to build something. So how is it just that like you have to probably like work on a lot of projects to like make yourself like stand out in this market moving forward and like use the tools like what are I guess like because you're a subject matter expert here and you probably know the trends a lot better than like me or other folks know. So what do you think is working well and what is not working well?
Yeah, so there's a couple different questions in there that I'll try to answer. I think in order and I'll stop sharing for a second, but the I think the best thing that you can do is so let me back up. What I see from my network and they're all kind of changing like how they're hiring, how they're like creating opportunities internally, like those types of things. And and one of the main things that they're doing kind of in interviewing and stuff is either one of two things is that you either have to come to the table with examples of things you've built or done with AI, and or you have to like demonstrate it live to them in the interviews and stuff. So you probably see a lot of this stuff of like we used to do like take home tests as a result. But what we actually would prefer to see is actually give a question in an interview, have the person share their screen, show how they're going about solving it, showing us like using that like AI tools, like that. That's kind of like what we want to see. And so, you know, uh, you know, certainly like if you were able to like publish a lot of this stuff, publicly to talk about how you're using AI and stuff, that's ideal, but that takes time. A lot of times you can't publish how you're using AI around internal projects. But what I do recommend is kind of to keep like a private portfolio of stuff. And that could be just as simple as something as like a Loom video kind of recording like how you're doing something with AI and like talking about it a little bit. And with like looms and that kind of stuff, you can blur out like sensitive info and all that kind of stuff. And you have that stuff at least in your back pocket, um, like as possible of it. So you kind of like want to accrue, I think, some of those examples and portfolios over time of things. It doesn't have to be like a fully built out, agent with N8N or Zapier or like a huge application with a lovable or something like that. Though obviously, once again, that stuff is great and it's ideal. I think the hardest part about this is like we all have our day jobs, right? We're looking at our long to-do list, and the constant debate that I am always having internally with myself is like, okay, do I just crank through this to-do list like I know how I do, or do I stop for a second and see if I can try this and do this and experiment, doing this in a different way with AI without really understanding whether or not it's going to produce a good outcome. That's the hard thing to do. And if you are facing those choices, what is really easy to do is just say is to always fall on the side of like I'm just going to crank through my to-do list. So you almost have to provide yourself a hard forcing constraint where it's like I'm just going to take one day or 20% of my list of to-dos and force myself to try to do it in a different way with AI to kind of like force you into the habit of trying to use it and stuff. And now some companies are supporting this much better than others, but I would say like don't wait for your company to support, like create the room for you to do it or give you the permission to do this stuff. Like I just always like you always have to take your own career, your own future, your own opportunities into your own hands and find ways to like carve out the space for you internally. So, anyways, I don't know. Those are some of just my quick suggestions. All right, let's move on. I think we have like 5 or 10 minutes left. But Alex asked for an early stage startup, less than 1 million ARR, about what percent of the focus should be spent on setting up known playbooks, the paid and organic channels you describe as becoming less productive to have a basic marketing function versus spending time on finding bigger opportunities, distribution bets. So if you're super early stage like that, less than 1 million ARR, the the deathbed is placing all your bets on essentially mature and declining channels because you just don't have the ability to break through in those types of things. So if we think about every kind of distribution playbook or channel or whatever we want to call it as like an S curve, it kind of goes through the flat part of the S curve where it's tends to be high investment, low reward because it's just too early. Then it goes through an inflection point and like a golden period where the curve goes really steep where, if you've positioned yourself correctly, you can ride those tailwinds. Then it goes into a maturation stage where it's the value like starts to flatten out, and then eventually it goes into decline. And so trying to invest in traditional SEO, a channel that I now consider in decline, and putting a huge part of your portfolio bet there as a less than 1 million AR startup, I think that's like a losing strategy. You're just never going to get the escape velocity that you potentially need. Now, it just so happens in this case right now where we're at in the world is that a lot of the things that you do for traditional SEO tend to also lend themselves well for the generative engine optimization, but it's still a big difference to say I'm optimizing for the chat experiences first, right? That is my core effort. That's my core lens, and trying to ride a channel that is clearly going through its inflection moment and on the way up, versus kind of the reverse. Now, if you're an incumbent, your portfolio strategy looks totally different. So I would say right now is like you probably need like 70% of your bets if you're an early stage startup on like new like things that will probably feel relatively like unproven, maybe non-consensus. And I'd only place about 30% of my bets in super mature, or super mature or things that are declining. That's kind of where, I'm at, currently on this front and portfolio mix. Okay. Just answered that one. Let's move on. Adish asked, how should startups approach OpenAI custom GPTs or Anthropic's artifacts since they will eventually close doors? So I think I answered a lot of this like in the presentation. So look, like you can see like custom GPTs and like these artifacts. These are kind of early plays, very early versions, like MVPs of what a platform might look like. And so, but what they don't really have tied to them right now is any sort of like value exchange on like how they're going to help generate additional organic distribution for you. GPTs have a tiny bit of it, but not really. Like they kind of launched that GPT store and then never really invested in it. They just basically abandoned it. But what I would do with what I do think is a good thing is all these things, all these new features launch is like you should be playing, you should be experimenting with them because what that helps you understand how these platforms act, how your users are interacting with these platforms, all of these types of things. And so as they as the distribution opportunities start to emerge and become more clear, they like launch more robust platforms, you will have a lot of the checkboxes already checked. You already have a deeper understanding of how these things might be interacting, how your users are playing on these platforms. And as a result, you'll tend to be faster towards figuring out what the right experience is to playing into one of these platforms as well. So that's kind of my, at this stage where it's like, it feels like these things are like right about to come, but not exactly clear yet. It's like a lot of time experimenting and understanding. Um, all right, and I'm gonna take a couple more, and then we'll have to wrap up. But Daphne asked, how soon can you or Reforge teach us all about AEO? Do we have a course yet? We do actually. Oh, so next week, actually, there is an excellent event from Ethan Smith, the founder of Graphite, probably one of the leading firms on AEO. So you should 100% participate in that. This fall, we are also coming out with a AI growth course that I'm writing myself. If you know of or have taken the growth series, our first ever course in the past, our most popular course in history is basically a giant AI update to that course, and AEO will be part of that course that's coming this fall. As long as you're on one of the Reforge email lists, you will definitely hear about it, or just follow me on LinkedIn. But to get started now, I would definitely recommend generate or going to that event. We also have some former events from Ethan Smith up on our YouTube channel. So just high recommend there. His stuff is very content rich and dense, and they are very open to sharing kind of like what they see working and a bunch of other data on that front. Um, and then distribution shift is real. Yes, says MacMel. Does it come with retention? How does it compare to the pre-AI? Well, whew. So this is the big question. It depends on what platform we're talking about. So one of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about is we're talking about the big distribution channels, the big platforms, the open AIs and stuff of the world. But this cycle also plays out on a much smaller level as well, depending on like what niche you're in. So just to give you an example around Reforge's historical category of courses and education, right? Udemy was a big platform, a big marketplace for course creators. The whole model was to attract third-party course creators into their marketplace, right? A lot of people don't know this, but when they first started in the early days, the value exchange was come onto our platform. We're going to share. It was something like 80% of the revenue with you. You're going to be featured in all of our email distribution lists, like all of these types of things, right? We're now many years later, and they've, I believe, now shifted the revenue share to creators down to like something around 20%, maybe even lower. So it's literally flipped, right? And you can see like they attracted a bunch of creators early on, hit escape velocity, closed down because they needed to monetize and compete. And so we will see smaller, more niche platforms emerge as well. Like, Cursor has been signaling launching like an agent platform as an example. So that might be a niche platform, to the developer audience, right? And so we'll see some of these more pockets as well. And depending on what your product is and what your audience is, it actually might make sense to play there first as they emerge. And so like I don't really question what the retention and usage is going to be on something like Chat GPT. Like that's good. That's very clear. But some of these more smaller and niche platforms certainly have gone through explosive growth. A lot of that growth has been driven by experimental usage and revenue, and so it's murkier waters there. It's more cloudy, and things will reveal as well. Okay. And last question I'm going to answer because I am running out of steam right now. I did not get my glass of water, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have other questions. Virginia asked, do you think podcasts will still be a relevant distribution channel? It depends on what you mean. So first of all, like podcasts by themselves don't have a distribution channel. So like creating and growing a podcast is so freaking hard. And the ones that actually tend to um, get dominance are the ones that are attached to some other large presence, like somebody who has a huge following on a social channel or a huge email list already brought up. But the other flip of this is that, of course, a lot of people have been sponsoring podcasts and all of those types of things, and it'll still remain a relevant distribution channel because I think people would still be are becoming even more and more hungry for you know they like to consume content that it feels like opinionated by a person versus a company and a brand. And podcasts are a phenomenal medium for that. But I would also say at the same time that this as like a channel to sponsor and all that kind of stuff has largely been, it's very well known right now. And so a lot of the early arbitrage is probably gone as a result. And so it's probably, that S curve we talked about. I would probably say it's probably exiting its golden era, the steep part of the curve, and is now entering its maturation phase, where the arbitrage opportunities just aren't as apparent and clear and clean. Okay, folks, we're going to wrap up here. I hope this was helpful for you all. Once again, if you want to go deeper on this, just go to my blog. You can go to brianbalfour.com or my Substack. There's a bunch of details there. As these things start to emerge, new platforms, all these types, I plan on writing about it. It's obviously something I'm paying a lot of close attention to, something I've learned both the hard and glorious way through my days. And so I'm happy to share those learnings. And of course, check out reforge.com if you want to go deeper on any of these topics. And we also have a bunch of new AI tooling for product teams like Reforge Insights. So check all that out as well. Anyways, hope this was helpful for everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.